Good morning. Welcome to this session. In this session, we'll be talking about two major issues in population geography. First is why the population is increasing at a different rate in different countries. And secondly, why do we face the problem of overpopulation? To address these two basic questions, we would be studying the basic population theories, the concept of population pyramids, and finally, the concept of overpopulation. So let's start with understanding why the population is increasing at a different rate in different countries. So Thomson and Neustein were one of the two famous geographers who gave the concept of what was known as the demographic transition theory. And under this demographic transition theory, they tried to explain that there are various phases of transition in the case of population, and this transition helps you understand which country lies in which stage. So they basically gave four stages in the demographic transition model. Stage first talked about countries, high birth rate and high death rate. The birth rate was high because of the lack of medical incentives, and again the death rate was high due to lack of medical innovations. So this led to low growth of the population. So this is the first stage where the population change is very less significant due to high birth rate and consequently high death rate. Now, to understand the concept of demographic transition model, there were two basic components that were important. First was the concept of population change, and second was economic development. So what Thomson and Neustein did was try to establish a relationship between the change in population and the concept of economic development. So the next stage we talk about is stage 2. Here, the birth rate remained high, but due to significant development in medical sciences, the death rate was controlled. So the death rate became low, and this led to high growth in population. The next stage we talk about is stage 3. So this stage is also stage 2 is also known as the stage for medical revolution. Because of the medical techniques and medical innovations, death rate decreased significantly. In the third stage, what happens is the birth rate declines again due to development in medical sciences, and the death rate is already low. So this led to a moderate growth in population. Now, to understand this concept, it's important to see that stage 3 came into the countries of Europe and US during the first half of the 20th century. So the advancement in these countries was much prior to the developed nations. Then we move on to the stage 4. Under stage 4, what happened was birth rate decreased and death rate was low. So birth rate nearly equated to death rate, and this led to low growth of population. Some of the scientists challenged this and said that this zero growth rate or zero population growth rate concept should be changed because the countries in Europe are now facing negative growth rate. As a result, some of the scientists gave a modification in this theory and gave stage 5 where birth rate was less than death rate, and this is common in the European nations where we can see negative population growth rate. So this is some of the important models, one of the very important theories in population geography that talks about why population is increasing at different rate in different countries because each of the countries are at the different stage in demographic transition. Now let's take an example. Stage 1, a classic example is Gambia in Africa. You have a very high infant mortality rate, a very high birth rate, and significantly high death rate. So for Gambia, you have infant mortality around 193, you have birth rate around 50 and death rate around 30. Now stage 2, the classic example here is Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, you can say infant mortality is around 133. We have birth rate at 45, but death rate has significantly decreased to 17.5. Stage 3, a good example here is of the country called Argentina. In Argentina, you can say infant mortality is high, 193, but birth rate declines to 24, and death rate is again significantly low at 8.5. The stage 4, a country with zero population growth rate is not at present. You cannot say any country is having a zero population growth rate exactly. But we have a lot of countries in the stage 3, and then we have European nations in the stage 4. Stage 5, a classic example is Denmark. In Denmark, you have infant mortality at 10, birth rate at 10, but death rate is 11. So death rate is higher than birth rate. So you have a negative population growth. So these are the classic examples of the various stages in the demographic transition. So as we can see across the globe, we have various countries from Africa to Europe, and we can see how they are lying in the various stage of demographic transition. Now let's understand this by means of a single country. So I'll take an example for India. So India was at the stage 1 till let's understand it for India. So India was in the stage 1 till 1920s. It moved on to stage 2 from 1920s to 70s, and currently from 70s it's predicted till 2020 at least it would lie into stage 3. So this is how we can say the demographic transition changes for one country. Now let's understand the concept by means of a simple diagram. So here is the diagram. So as you can see here, this curve here shows this line here shows the total population. So this is the line showing the total population. Then you have this line which is coming here. This shows the birth rate. And then you have another line which is lying down that shows the death rate. So as you can see, in most of the cases, birth rate is more than death rate, and therefore this region is the region of natural increase in the population. As you can see, the natural increase was very less during the pre-industrial phase. It was highly stationary. This was the phase called as early expanding phase or the industrial phase. Then within the industrial phase, you have early expanding and late expanding. The natural increase is significant, and finally in the stage 4, which is low stationary, you have a growth rate which is nearly equivalent because birth rate and death rate are nearly the same. Now let's move on to the next concept here, which is important to understand why population is increasing at a different rate for different countries, is the concept of population pyramid. So I'll try to explain it here itself. So this is a classic population pyramid curve, as you can see in the figure here. So on the vertical axis you have the age, and the horizontal axis you have the population. So what we do is we consider the center and we take one side as females, other side as males, and then we divide it based on the age group. So it's the lowest age group is, for example, 10 to 14 I have taken here, and here is 80 to 89 years. So I am drawing the population in terms of males and females in this curve, and this curve is classically known as the population pyramid curve. Now, what are the factors that affect the population pyramid curve? There are two basic kinds of factors that we can demarcate. It's the short-run factors and the long-run factors. Short-run factors can be kind of war, epidemic, any migration issues. So these are the factors that affect population in short run. Population that is affected by long run is classically the fertility, then you have the mortality, and the other demographic factors. So these are the factors that affect the population in long run. Based on this, you try to draw out a population pyramid, and this population pyramid, as we can see here, is of 4 types. That's early expanding, late expanding, low stationary, and declining. Declining because, as you can see, Here the age group of 0 to 10 and 10 to 14 is less as compared to the middle-aged workforce. So the classic examples of expanding population is, so you have expanding population. The classic example is Brazil. Then if I say the population curve is stable, the example is Japan. Then you have constructive or kind of decreasing and declining population, I should say. It's Europe. And finally, if you want to find out the intermediate expansion, it would be a classic example would be USA. So this is what is important to know about the population pyramid curve, population pyramids. Now, another thing which is important here is the sex composition. So the proportion of males and females to the total population is the ratio. Now this ratio varies from country to country. Each country has a different parameter to measure it. For example, in Russia, what you try to measure is population of males by total population into 100, or population of females by total population into 100. But this varies in India. In India, you try to find out females per thousand number of males. While in USA, it's the vice versa case. It's male per thousand females. So sex composition can be found out by three methods. It's the primary sex ratio, secondary sex ratio, and tertiary sex ratio. The primary sex ratio is at conception. The secondary is at birth. And tertiary is at enumeration. And enumeration means counting or listing. So it's basically at the time you are counting or listing the population. So these are the three major techniques to find out the sex composition in a region. Now the next major question that we talked about that we would be addressing today is why we face the problem of overpopulation. Now this is important to understand here. The concept of overpopulation, Malthus, in his interesting theory, gave a concept that there are two factors, population and food. He said population always increases geometrically. So the increase would be 1, 2, then you have 4, 8, 16, while the food, so the increase would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So what he said that there would be a time where the population would outgrow the food resources. So if I say a population is doubling technically in 25 years, so what would happen in 200 years? In 200 years, it would be 256 times, but the food supply would increase only 9 times. So there would be an imbalance due to overpopulation, and that is the reason why he said we need to put out checks. Now he talked about three basic checks. The first is the positive check. The positive check is checking the mortality rate or the death rate. The second he talked about preventive checks, where he talked about curbing the fertility rate or the birth rate. And finally, he talked about moral checks. So moral checks are the moral restraints that a person must put up. So these are the three checks he talked about. Now, he suggested various ways to decrease the birth rate, because that's the only case you can decrease population which is increasing geometrically. So he said to decrease birth rate, there are two ways. If there is a region of low birth rate, how? Due to economic development or medical awareness, literacy, that's one of the reasons. Now, if there is a region with high death rate, what it is attributed to? The high death rate is attributed to various Pandemic diseases. Pandemic diseases are those diseases which spread out globally, like the recent one is the Ebola virus. Okay, before it was H1N1, the swine flu. So there are high death rates which are caused due to pandemic diseases. So one of the most famous pandemic diseases was the Black Plague. It is spread out in Kyrgyzstan and it led to around 25 million deaths. Then he talked about cholera, SARS. These were some of the diseases which took out tolls of the people. Now, this is the basic reason why we say that we face the issue of overpopulation. Now, there are few major important theories which are not related to the concept of overpopulation but just a part of the major population theories. So we will be discussing those theories briefly. The first is the Marx theory. Marx in his theory says capital accumulation. If I have capital, if I have money, what I would do? I would have a surplus in population. That surplus in population would lead me to lower wages, lower standard of living, and that lower standard of living would give rise to poverty. Poverty would lead to high birth rate and again high death rate, and this would lead to consequently the last resort would be population growth. So he said there are two classes. One is the ruling class, and another is the basically the working class. So he said the ruling class is less in number, while the working class is more in number. Okay, so he said because of that there is this concept of the working class which have more people and they are technically the people who give rise to the population growth. The next theory we talk about is the Sadler's concept. Sadler in this theory gave the concept that Sadler was basically contemporary to Malthus and he said that population of an area decreases if the density of settlement in the region increases. The next was Doubleday. Doubleday in his concept explained that population is inversely related to food supply. If the food supply is more, population is less and vice versa. Castro gave a similar concept where he said if the food supply increase, the population would decrease. But he also focused on another concept that more protein in the diet leads to decreased fecundity or fertility rate. The next concept was given by Dumont. Dumont gave the concept of theory of social capillarity, where he says the population decreases as we move in the hierarchy, as we move up in the hierarchy. So it was known as the concept of social capillarity. The next concept was given by Sanders. Sanders in the concept gave the concept of, they gave the theory of optimum number. He is to achieve the optimum number in the population growth. And finally, the most important is the Coates. He gave that population governs the labor. If the population is more, the labor is more, and that is ultimately governed by demand in labor. So if there is more demand in labor, the population of the region would increase. And finally, there was Uranus. He gave the concept that population is determined solely by economic development of the region. These were some of the major theories. Now, we'll talk about the problems of overpopulation. So, overpopulation, as we all know, is a major problem or a major issue that has been addressed globally. So, overpopulation what does it lead to? It leads to unemployment, slow growth, then you have lot of social issues, you have less water, unhygienic conditions, less resources, pollution is more, then you have lack of land, you have higher prices for the commodities, so you have inflation, then there is poverty, conflict, the crime rate increases, it's attributed mostly to urbanization, then you have the culture of slums that's coming up due to overpopulation. These are some of the problems of overpopulation. On the other hand, underpopulation also has its own unique problems. The regions in Europe, as we addressed before, are having negative population growth rate. What would happen due to negative population growth? The proportion of aging population would increase. As the aging population would increase, there would be less people who would be able to look after the aging population. So the workforce would decrease. This would lead to increase in the dependency ratio. So what is dependency ratio? Dependency ratio is the ratio of people who are able to work divided by the old age and the children. So you have either the old age or the child population there and the working population. So the dependency ratio in this case would increase. Underpopulation would lead to improper resource utilization. Employment options would decrease. There would be shortage of work. Government would be under burden because it would have to sustain a huge number of aging population. The regional population, there would be a loss in diversity of the regional population. Skilled labor would decrease because there would be people being involved more to sort out the problems of aging and dependency related issues. So be it overpopulation or underpopulation, we need to solve these issues. And when we try to solve these issues, we need to address some of the basic concepts. So what are the main techniques to solve the population problems? First is family planning. Then you have regulating the age of marriage. It should not be too early and not be too late. Then you should improve the progeny. So progeny improvement is another basic aim that we talk about. Then promoting the concept of cleanliness or improving public health. So addressing the issues of health, education, women empowerment. So these are some of the issues that we readily need to address in order to solve the issues of population. There should be strict vigilance by government on immigration and immigration. So people coming into the country and going out of the country. Creation of new settlements and strict control by municipalities and local authorities on the expansion of the region. So these are some of the major issues that we discuss while we talk about the population regions. Hope you enjoyed the session. In the next session, we would be talking about the concepts of migration, what are the push factors and the pull factors and the important concepts in the theories of migration. Have a good day.